with best-selling author Cassandra King Conroy, she will share all about her life and the man she shared a lot of it with, paying tribute to her husband, Pat Conroy, who was a legendary figure of modern Southern literature. That this book we're talking about is her memoir, Tell Me a Story, My Life with Pat Conroy, and gives an intimate look into her shared life of 19 years with the acclaimed writer, whose novels brought national attention to our little postage stamp of South Carolina coast, the low country here, just a little bit south, really down in Beaufort was the main attention area. Cassandra King was a young fledgling novelist teaching in her native state of Alabama when she first encountered the famed writer, whose popular works I'm sure you know, The Water is Wide, The Great Santini, The Prince of Tides. After she and Pat married, Cassandra soon established herself as a considerable writer in her own right. Her second novel, The Sunday Wife, became a New York Times bestseller, and she has published 4 other well-received novels: Making Waves, The Same Sweet Girls, Queen of Broken Hearts, and Moonrise, an homage to Daphne du Maurier's Rebecca, set in the North Carolina mountains. She has also produced a popular nonfiction book, The Same Sweet Girl's Guide to Life, in addition to numerous essays as well as magazine pieces for Coastal Living, Southern Living, and Garden and Gut. Tell Me a Story was released from William Morrow last year. Cassandra resides in Beaufort, where she is honorary chair of the Pat Conroy Literary Center. So please join me in giving a very, very warm welcome to Cassandra.
Thank you, everybody, for being here today. Can everybody hear me okay? Because I can't hear myself. I mean, I can hear myself, but you know.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. It's always great to be in a library, one of my favorite places in all the world, and also to be with people that you know are book lovers and readers, or you wouldn't be here. So, thanks to each other for inviting me. And Tim Conroy for making me come. He didn't have to twist my arm, I promise.
Well, could you tell us a little bit about yourself before you met Pat?
Yeah. When I met Pat in 1995, and at that time, this is one of those things that was kind of looking back on it that I realized, because I emphasized in the book where we were, what different places Pat and I were at that time in our professional lives, our careers. He was at sort of the height of his career as a novelist. Probably at that point, 1995, he was probably one of the best-known writers in the United States, because it had in the late 80s, The Prince of Tides came out, and it was a big blockbuster hit in itself, and then they did the movie in '92, and that was the next year it was nominated for I've forgotten 7 or 8 Academy Awards, and Pat was nominated for an Academy Award, you know, for his screenwriting and this sort of stuff. So he was kind of where all writers imagine themselves being one of these days, you know, when we started out. He had really been a professional writer all of his adult life, except for the 3 years that he taught. But I might talk a little bit more about his first book a little bit, but that was just at the point that he and I had been a fan of his. You know, I had, like so many other, I think, teachers especially, I'd read The Water is Wide and been inspired, you know, by The Water is Wide, and the Great Santini, and then when the Lords of Discipline came out, I was really busy at the time or something. Somehow I almost missed that one, and my son, my oldest son, was assigned the Lords of Discipline to read in his honors English class, and brought it home, and I thought, oh, good, Pat Conroy has a new book. You know, you look back on these things and you never dream that how fate will come into your life and change it totally. So at that time, when Pat was up here, I was way down here because I was just starting my career as a writer. My first book was coming out, and it had been my master's thesis, the basis for my master's in creative writing. And my thesis committee had said, you ought to see about getting this published. And there was a small press I'd heard about it. I just sent it to them. They took it, gave me a little bit of money for it, and I was just as happy as if I sent it to it, because I didn't know any better. But you know, I'd had a couple of short stories and things like that published in anthologies, local kind of, you know, from University Press, and some short stories in anthology. I mean, in literary quarterlies and stuff. So I wasn't really that ambitious or anything like that with my writing. I think a lot of it's because of my generation. Women of my generation could be nurses, teachers, you know, or secretaries. But writers, well, that was a sweet little hobby for me to have. You know? And so that's where we were when we met. That's why I was teaching at a small college outside of Birmingham. What we didn't know about each other when I met Pat that first night, I didn't see him again for 2 years. But we were at the same place in our life, in our personal lives, without, you know, having any idea. Of course, I had gone through the year before, had a divorce, and as I said one time to Pat, had gone through a traumatic divorce, and he said, "Is there any other kind?" So, and he was in the same boat, but we didn't know that about each other for a couple of years.
Yeah. So you met him, and then how did that relationship develop? You said it was a couple of years before you saw him again.
Yeah. Well, it was really odd. But anything associated with Conroy, I always say it's got Conroy in the name, it's going to be weird, and it's going to be dysfunctional. We became friends and talked on the phone. He just called me out of the blue. My girlfriends teased me and said, "Has he asked you out yet?" and stuff like that. I said, "No." And as far as I knew, he was, you know, a happily married man and this kind of stuff. We just talked about writing. He wanted to hear about my book. He wanted to know how I was doing. When I met him at a reception in where he was at a book festival, he was the keynote speaker. He had offered to give me a blurb for my first book. He wanted to hear all about, and I would find out later that's part of Pat's persona. He was the most supportive writer, remains to this day, of other writers I've ever seen. And that's very unusual. I don't think we're not a very close-knit tribe. And supportive of each other, maybe on the surface at least, or something, you know. But Pat truly was. So he really encouraged me. He was the first person that ever said that I should call myself a writer. You know, I gave myself permission. You've written books. You are a writer. You know. Yeah.
He was amazingly generous, which for a writer, and that's bizarre. That Conroy.
It is, and it's not. That's not saying. If Pat were here, he would say, "Oh yes, it is." I was about to say it's not saying anything about our characters. Maybe it is, but I think it's more our character. It's time. It's time as much as anything. I mean, you get a book contract, and usually, mine have mostly been 2 years. I have a lot of friends, you know, some of them have been here, Mary Alice, and some of my dear friends, they'll do them a year at a time. How on earth girls do this? They're just young, I guess, you know, don't know any better. But you've got that pressure, you know, you've got, and if you get any sort of, you know, name for yourself or recognition or something, then usually you are asked to go out and speak at, you know, book festivals and all this sort of stuff. And you have all that going on. Plus, you've got, you know, a couple of years to get your book out. And it's difficult to find time to read other writers' books and encourage them, but, you know, even to give a blurb, which is the little, you know, thingy that people say, oh, this is the best book I've ever read, and all this sort of stuff. If only you knew some of them.
And you have some great blurbs on the back from really, you know, Dorothea Ben Frank, Mary Alice Monroe, Rick Bragg, Ron Rash, you know, you got some big names.
That will always be special to me. This was the last blurb that Dottie gave. Before she got sick. Yeah. But, you know, it's so it's as much a time constraint as anything else. But Pat was, he made the time. He was just that generous and so forth. But I guess I've got off subject from how our friendship developed. We, as I was saying, we met that night. He offered to give me a blurb for my first book, and called me, you know, to talk about it, and would just continue calling, you know, every now and then, just out of the blue. And then 2 years later, he was coming back to the same book festival where we had been in Birmingham. And he was, the keynote that year was Ann Rivers Siddons, who became a really dear friend of mine. And I was so excited about getting to meet her as well. She was one of my favorite writers. And Pat called and invited me to go to come to the event with him to meet Ann Siddons and so forth. And I guess that was sort of the start of it. By then, we had talked enough that at one point he had said, when I had moved, and he called my number. Called my number. Used to, they would leave a recording. You know, you don't get that anymore. But with your new number, because this was '96. You know, it'd been somewhere around like, it was right beginning of '97 when I saw him again. But yeah, so he called, you know, that number, and he said, "You have a new number. Have you moved?" And I hadn't thought to tell him, and that was when I said, yeah, I took another, I was teaching at a two-year college then out over in East Alabama. And said, that was the first time I said, yeah, I got a divorce and I moved, you know. And Pat, Mr. Smooth, said, oh, you're divorced. So we had found out those things about each other, but
that was his opening.
Yeah, it was the romance.
And was he romantic?
He really was.
Yeah.
Yes, he was a really sweet man. He was, you've had Tim, if any of you've heard Tim talk. And I think all of the Conroy boys are. Their mother did a good job with them. They're very gentlemanly, you know, they're kind, they're sweet. And Pat, he certainly was. You wouldn't think that maybe if you read his works. I was speaking about a year after we married, and I didn't use his name. I just used it on this book. I'm not going to anymore because they wanted. I let my publisher talk me into it. But I was speaking somewhere upstate, Greenville or somewhere, and a woman came up after my talk. A woman came up to me and she said, "Somebody told me you're married to Pat Conroy." And I said, "Yes." And of course I was expecting what I normally hear from that. "Oh my God, you know, can I touch the hem of your garment? He's my favorite bride," you know, blah, blah. And she said, "Oh, honey, bless your heart." I mean, she obviously was told. And she said, "Oh, it must be so difficult. I mean, it's so dark and, you know, troubled and depressed and all of that." And that his writing is very dark, very tortured, you know, kind of absolutely. And his themes were certainly, you know, not the most pleasant in the world. Yeah. And so I think I would have, I guess since I got to know him, you know, by talking with him for that period of time, before we actually then did get to know each other, I knew that wasn't true, but I think I would have thought the same thing just based on his. I mean, just like, don't you think Stephen King's probably creepy? Where does he come up with this stuff? Would you like to be married to him?
It's got to come from somewhere. Although he plays in a band, and,
yeah.
You know.
Oh, I met him. He's nice, but he is a little, not creepy, little weird.
Yeah, well, this is being recorded, so we'll have to be careful.
So nice.
I'd like to get Stephen King here one day. No, but yeah, Pat got all that dark, traumatic stuff out, it seemed, in his writing. Kind of
yes.
Got those, exercised those gifts, but could be a very sweet, just like, you know, Tim is just such a good guy. They had good hearts.
Yes, absolutely.
I remember Pat telling a story about you. You know, when he would write, he had those legal pads and a pencil, and would just, you know, it was a torturous process for him. But he listened over to you in the other room, and he said he'd hear you giggling.
Yeah, I told him I cracked myself up.
Yeah. So you seem to love
yeah, he would tease me about that. He did say that I enjoyed writing a lot more than he did, and I think there was some truth to that. But it probably had to do, and that's not to say that my topics are all, you know, sugar and spice, right. Despite the titles. You know, like The Same Sweet Girls is a facetious title.
There's some bless your heartness going
yeah.
on. There's some twisting.
And yeah, so I deal with, you know, a lot of the darker themes and topics as well, kind of under the surface. But I do enjoy writing, and it may be that it was something I always wanted to do. I wanted to be a writer, and I wrote. I didn't just want to be a writer. You know, I mean, I loved writing, and I wrote from the time I was old enough to pick up a pencil, and wrote all these little stories, and would read them to my playmates and my sisters, and you know, this sort of stuff. But as I say, I wasn't really ever encouraged to be a writer. I went off to college, and I wanted to be. I had seen my first play, live play, so I decided I wanted to be a playwright, and majored in English and theater. And my mother, you know, said, "Well, you're getting a teaching certificate." I said, "No, I don't want to teach. I want to be a writer." No, young lady, you're getting a teaching certificate in case you have to support yourself if something happens to your husband. Well, I didn't have a husband, you know, but that was her generation and her, you know, mentality as well. But I, you know, yeah, I love writing.
Do you feel like you could do anything else? I mean, are you bound to write?
Yeah,
an obsession?
I really, it is as close to an obsession as anything. When I'm not writing, I put writing in my head. I have this theory. Pat used to say I had a theory about everything, but I think that most writers have troubled marriages. You know, kind of like you don't hear as much about them, but almost like, you know, movie stars and stuff. You know, a lot of troubled marriages. So I've decided that writers should only marry each other, because I thought about starting a dating service or something. Because I think that's what you have. It's difficult to live with someone who lives in their head so much. So when I'm not literally writing, I'm thinking about what I'm going to be writing next. I really do. I've got this book I've started now, and I'm just so excited about it. I can't wait to get back to it and this sort of stuff. But you know, it's hard to be in a relationship with someone when you know you're not getting this person's full attention.
Yes.
That their mind is somewhere else most of the time. And Pat and I talked about that a lot. That both of us think that that's what happened in our former marriages, that we weren't, you know, 100% into
present
and
yeah.
and so forth. You know.
And it seems like in a lot of famous couples writing, you know, famous writers, that it's or you know, either it's they marry another writer. You know, they marry themselves, sort of, or they marry someone who's very, sort of a very plain person who can kind of handle the, you know, they don't need the writer to be present all the time. So it's, and that kind of works, yeah, in the other direction. But by the way, my wife is working on her first novel right now. I don't know what
Sorry to hear
nothing to do with me living in my house.
Can't beat them showing them.
Yeah, there's a character named Husband Number One. It's just a placeholder name. Do you feel like, did Pat influence your writing, do you feel like, or?
Well, I'm not sure about my writing directly, because we did have totally different, you know, writing styles and dealt with different subjects and all that stuff. But he certainly, I think, influenced my career and approach to it. Because that's what he had done, you know, since he was 25 years old. And so he was, you know, he was able to helped me navigate the rather complex world of publishing and agents and book tours and all this kind of stuff, because what I didn't realize when my first book came out, it came out in '95, was that, well, most writers are very well, introspective, of course, but introverts. Pat was an exception, because he could be introverted, but he was very much he was charismatic or extroverted, part of his personality as well. But I don't think you really realize, when you first start out, you'll have to warn your wife about this, that you're expected to promote your books. First time I realized I was going to have to go out and talk about a book. What am I going to say about it? You read it. You don't talk about it. So he helped me negotiate some and to understand, because I would complain, I would say things like, but I started on my new book, I can't go on a book tour, and he was, well, it was in your contract, I have to agree.
How many tour dates, do you even know how many tour dates you've done so far for Tell Me a Story?
For Tell Me a Story? I know it would be, because the last time I remember it was like 36 cities. So it's somewhere,
That's
in that range. And a lot of times it is literally going from one place. I write about this in a section of the book at one point, going from one place to the next. And that's one thing Pat told me. He said, you're going to get somewhere and not even remember where you are. I'm thinking, I'm senile, but I'm not that bad. Sure enough, you get out and you think, oh my God, am I in Raleigh or Chapel Hill? I always get those two mixed up anyway, this sort of stuff.
So it came out in October. So you're
end of October.
Yeah, end of October, and you really have been out barnstorming, and obviously we've got a full house here, and it's been extremely well received, and so it's doing great. But it is, you can imagine how tired this can be, to do this, and but it is. You're doing it in spades, but it's a lot of work. Right, being a writer, it's a lot of work. It's not just collecting all the happy laurels.
Yeah.
And aside from doing the writing, that side, that it's you put a lot into it.
And as I was saying earlier, I think it's something people don't always realize too, because Pat and I used to joke. If there was something that needed to be done in the family, like make an appearance at Uncle so-and-so's funeral representative, well, Pat or Cassandra can do it. They don't have a job, They're
flexible hours.
And you do. I mean, on the surface, you start to see that everybody else has a 9 to 5 or teaching or whatever. I retired from teaching right full time now. But that have been for a long time now. But so that makes sense. But especially if you're doing have done some magazine writing, which I enjoy. I really have enjoyed that as well. It kind of forces you. What I like about magazine writing, I don't know if any of you have done it or thought about doing it, but it forces you in a discipline. Got so many words. The ones I did for Coastal Living, for about a year I did the back essay, and they were really precise. Now, and some of the others you could be in a range. You can be from say 1,000 words to 1,500, or something like that. But this was a 500 word, And it's a great, next time I teach, I'm going to, because it's a great exercise in going back and seeing what you don't need, trimming some unnecessary descriptive stuff and so forth. But now I forgot what I was saying that for. Oh, but if you're doing something like that magazine, if you don't get it in, they do at least 6 months ahead of time. So, you might, I wrote my Thanksgiving thing that I did for Southern Living. I wrote that in July, something like that. So, but if you don't get it in, it won't appear. Your Thanksgiving article will not appear that year because, they've got to get it. And so, something comes up, you're the one that's not working, and you have to go to it. It doesn't always work out that way.
Yeah. No, it's and you're, as you said, you're kind of always working. It's tough with your, internally you got that narrative going all the time. So it's tough to give yourself a break, in action. So, yeah. So are there any stories not in the book that you'd like to share? Anything that was maybe unfit to print or?
Oh, believe me, with Pat, there were a lot of things. I also have had trouble finding things to read because I realized if I were going to write about Pat, and I really wanted his readers to know him as I knew him and so forth, he was quite a colorful character himself, and he had a pretty salty vocabulary that he blamed totally on the Citadel. And I gave him some, I think there was something to that because he was, I've met too many people that knew him in high school. He was such a goody two-shoes, and he was an altar boy. And, he was this nice little Catholic boy that had always gone to Catholic schools and this sort of stuff. And so he swears to me that a lot of his persona developed as a Citadel, so he blames him anyway. But yeah, I'll tell one story. But this tells you more about Pat too. And one thing about him, he was full of blarney. Such an Irishman. You could just look at him. He looked. He said he went to Ireland and met himself 100 times coming down the streets. And the map of Ireland on his face. But he was just had so much mischief. He was always teasing, always had this great dark, sharp, wit. But I never knew what he was going to say. A minute ago when you said you read something he said about me, I was thinking, oh God, what? Because I never knew with him that we were at the Miami book festival. Most of the time, I did this a couple of times, and I learned never to do it again, is when people would ask us to speak together, on things, usually like a fundraiser or something like that. So we did a few of those, but Pat would often introduce me by saying, my wife is here. She's a writer as well, but she writes pornography. I write only Christian fiction. Just so full of it like that. And so one time at the Miami Book Festival, this was, y'all will know when this was, it was before the author was asked, we were up there, and he said, y'all may not know this about my wife, but she has a big hit out that she didn't even use her name on it. It was called 50 Shades of Grey. Of course, I said, you wish. More ways.
Yeah.
But
beautiful mess, yeah.
You met him?
Oh, yeah, yes, I did get the chance a couple of times over. I knew Catherine Sells.
Oh,
So
yes,
she,
yes.
his official biographer, so we got to meet. She's one.
Poor Catherine. I don't know.
Yes.
This is his official biography is coming out from Random House in probably a couple of years.
Yeah,
I think
she's
Catherine
still-
keeps getting bogged down in all the Conroy family
It's-
stories and so forth that was supposed to come out.
She kind of got absorbed. She almost became a surrogate Conroy.
She did.
Which is
She, what
wonderful.
we say is that she drank the Kool-Aid.
Yes.
Yeah, but she's a professor up in Illinois and
yes.
has gotten a contract to do it.
Hard on this biography, which will really be something, but
Thank
it's
you.
a lot of work going into it. And she, of course, became very attached to all the Conroys. So, but I had the chance to meet Pat there at the Conroy Center, and so he was incredibly generous to this literary scholar, and so very nice. And he said that we authors are a very arrogant tribe, and I said I know the feeling. Literary scholars are also.
Yeah.
So, but what was the toughest thing about your life with Pat, would you say?
Well, there were a lot of things. I knew if I wrote this book, I was going to have to deal with some things that I'm a very private person. Did any of you read the book yet?
Yes.
Yeah, well, Pat's nickname for me was Helen Keller. And he said that was not only Helen Keller and I both native Alabamians, but I said nothing, saw nothing, heard nothing. And what he meant by that is I was really reserved and reticent, and private person. And I would always say, well, unlike you, which you write about everything, your family and stuff like that, I don't. I at least try to disguise. So, I came to writing this kind of book, then I realized that I couldn't be Helen Keller, with the book, and was going to have to deal with some subjects and treat them in an honest sort of more revealing way. And part of that was the dysfunction in Pat's family. Of course, my family was not at all. This was a crazy Conroy. But he had the great tragedy of his life was his estrangement from his youngest daughter. And it was right. If I could have avoided that, I would have. But that was right as Pat and I married. And that was a central, part of our life together is trying to reconcile with his daughter. And then there were Pat's health problems. He talked about them sometimes, fairly openly. He did not take care of himself. He was, as I said, the Irishman who, drank too much, ate too much, totally, he would go to a doctor. I was talking with his doctor, Lafitte. I don't know if you know the Lafitte's in South Carolina, but Lucius is our doctor in Beaufort. And just the other day, he had sent Pat to this heart doctor in Charleston. And Lucius told me that when he got the report back, there was nothing on him. She didn't do any tests on him or anything. And what happened, I was right there, is Pat started asking the doctor all about herself and all this sort of stuff, and she forgot to even examine her. You know? He was like that. I mean, couldn't do anything with him. Yeah. So yeah, I deal with that. And then I, you know, of course, having to write about his illness again, his final illness and death. I knew that was not going to be easy. It was a lot harder than I thought it was. Because I'm also fairly stoic, so I was thinking, well, I'll just, you know, but I would get into it and I'd start crying and I just think I can't do this now. So sometimes I'd have to put the book aside and go back to it.
What would you say, can you say what the best thing about being married to Pat or sharing your life with Pat was?
Yeah, he was a lot of fun. After all, I mean, after I said, huh? Yeah. But no, he really was. He was a lot of fun. He was a dear man. There was never, ever a dull moment. That's for sure. Fascinating. Just absolutely fascinating. I swear, I really believe he was a genius. You know, he loved talking with him about literature. I've never ever seen anyone read like he did. There again, with a time thing, that's one of the things that I miss. You know, when I'm writing, is reading other. You know, I just don't. It's just so much time. But Pat, there again, he made time. He read. Was always reading 3 or 4 books, but he could talk about them. He had a huge collection. We had about 7,000 books, so he was a collector. And I loved him. But we would have a writer maybe visiting or something like that, and they would get talking about books, and Pat would say, "Didn't you love such and such, what he said in such and such a book?" And he would go and start looking at the shelves. Okay, pull it out, you know. And I mean, I start reading something, man, I get halfway into it and think, I've read this before. And so he had those amazing memories.
Yeah. That's incredible. The ability to retain it is.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Never seen anything like it. It's absolutely amazing.
And that's something that, you know, a common thread with great writers is that ability to just, voracious reading is, you know, read and read and read. And I think for any writer, you just, you know, that's common advice. Is you just got to read.
That's what I always tell
Yeah.
Students. When I talk to credit writers, first thing I ask them, how many of you are readers?
Yes.
Yeah. Most of them were. But if they weren't, then,
you know, it's tough. It's tough to do if you're not reading. You know, that's the best way to write.
Oh, absolutely.
You got to read. That's your practice. And unfortunately, I think, you know, that's diving off with the younger generation. We're trying, but it's tough.
My poor grandkids, I'm always.
I'm thinking of 2 kids right now in my own house, and they got plenty of books around. But we shouldn't be such Cassandras. We should be Cassandras like this, negative Cassandras.
The prophetess who predicted. That's the other thing, because I'm always saying that I'm always right about stuff, you know.
You have a theory for everything, and it's always right.
I have a theory. It's always right. Nobody believes me, but.
Yeah. But, well, you know, and you made an interesting point earlier. You are using, it's Cassandra King Conroy. It makes sense for this book, but you're Cassandra King, you know, and you, as I reiterate, you are a best-selling author in your own writing. You know, you've had success. You're a writer, and the title, "Tell Me a Story." You're a great storyteller, and even, you know, I got to have dinner with you last night, and you're just a natural, automatic storyteller. And you're also a very calm and calming presence. So it's just, you're just kind of a delightful person to be around too. But so tell me a story. That's a famous, Pat Conroy would say that.
I would not have called this book anything else. I think another thing, most people don't realize about writing and the writing profession and so forth, is how little control that you have over your work sometimes. If a publisher or the marketing team does not like your title, they will insist that you change it. You have very little control over the cover or the design of your book and this sort of stuff. So I had, I think with my other books, I didn't have that much of a problem. The one that I changed the title of, I think, was right. But my first book, Making Waves, when it was originally Making Waves in Zion, which is a little community in Alabama that I wrote about, but where the setting was, but they wouldn't let me use that. They just said it had to be Making Waves when I resold it later. But anyway, all that is to say that sometimes you have to go to bat for what you want, as a title or cover or whatever. And Tell Me a Story was Pat to me. How many of you ever met him in a signing line? His signings are legendary. They still are. And I write about this, and I also wrote more about it in the little Low Country Art book that we did. That was kind of the whole basis of my little essay there about Pat, is his signings. When you have a book signing, usually certainly if you're a big shot like Pat, the publisher will send someone to make sure everything goes smoothly, because they know bookstore owners always can't be the heavy, So they will be there to say, the author will not personalize, or cannot bring books in, from home. Only do 2 books, and they keep things moving like that, and that's what their jobs are. Pat must have driven him crazy because he paid, and he would tell people in line, "Don't pay attention to them, bring whatever you want." And he would personalize, but he would always say, "Now tell me your story," to whoever he was. Who is this for? Where are you from? This sort of stuff. And I saw it so many times that he collected stories in the same way he collected books. And sometimes he would say, I heard him say to people, he would tell me about these incidences too, where he would steal stories. And he would say, consider that story stolen. And I'll meet people who say, I'm the one that told Pat about such and such, And he said he was going to use it in a book, and he did, and this sort of stuff. And so that had to be Tell Me a Story, because that was Pat.
And so, he was always that storytelling impulse, but you've got it too, and that's, I think you put your story together with his, and that's, I think that's worthy of note and praise here. You've got this your own way of getting the story out as well. That it's and it's a charming, and even though you're a private person, and you're taking the private lives and making them public in this memoir, and it's not your, that's not your wheelhouse.
Yeah,
that's more Pat's.
Exactly.
It's not your thing, but you do it you do it wonderfully here, and so I think that's a big, it's a big step, and I know his fans certainly appreciate it, and we appreciate you talking about it here.
I had, not too long ago, I've gotten a lot of response from the book, and from, mostly from Pat's fans, because that was part of the reason. I wanted people to know, not just the literary icon that he was, but kind of, the person that he was, the man that I loved and respected and such. Of that, and so I've just got so many things, but I had one just the other day that started out when I saw that you had written this book, about your life with my favorite writer. I wasn't, I resisted it. I didn't want to read it because I idolized him so much. I was afraid I was going to not like him after reading this book. And she said, did the opposite, for me.
So yeah, it just sort of flushes him out as a person. And speaking of which, you also had part of that life before. You raised 3 sons, and you have 10 grandchildren now, from coast to coast, out in California and all. So you've lived a full life outside of your head, outside of books as well. So it's you have many stories to tell of your own. So this is you're something else too, and you can see why Pat Conroy would be very fascinated with you and your stories to tell. Yeah. So would you like to say a word about your next project, or are you one of those who's superstitious about doing that, or do you?
I don't ever read from something before it's
okay.
published and stuff, but I don't mind saying just a little. Well, I can't say much more, a little bit, because it's still forming anyway. But the one thing I'm sort of excited about with this book is what I can't say that I resisted doing it. I had no desire to whatsoever, but this is going to be my first book, well, except for this one, which had to be. But I'm writing I started a fiction book that's set in the Low Country. It's going to be set in Beaufort. And I, as I said before, a lot of people would say, pick up one of my books and just assume, say, oh, I want to read this because I love to read about the Low Country. Oops. I'll let them find out when they read it. I didn't sell any of my books in the Low Country. I did my territory that I was most familiar with. So I just somehow knew that this book was going to be. And it's also, I'm going to deal as one of the subplots. It's going to be a follow-up to The Same Sweet Girls 20 years later. But it's one of the subplots is my passion, the saving of the family farm. And so that's going to be one of the main themes in this new book. Would you like to read just a little section of this? Okay. And then we'll give you a taste, questions, yeah. And then we'll do some Q&A. Okay, all righty. I'll just do a brief little reading here. This is one that I usually do because I feel like people can relate. It's about a family reunion. Oh, I was going to say another thing that Pat would always say when he introduced me or something besides that I wrote pornography. He would say that when he first met my family, he thought that he was on the set of Deliverance. I was raised in a farm in South Alabama. But I always told him, while it made a better story, it was hardly true. The Kings of Pinkard, Alabama, were not only solidly middle class, we were also highfalutin Methodist. I can tell you one thing, those were not Methodist boys in that movie. That's the King's house. My mother's family from Florida were as cracker as they come and ranged from Bible thumpers to bootleggers. Let it be known I refrain from using the term cracker around my relations, even though a historian corrected me for calling it a slur. According to him, it's a perfectly acceptable way of referring to Florida's rough and tumble early settlers. Maybe so, but I'm not taking any chances by riling one up. One time before Pat and I married, we were taking a trip south, seems like to Mobile, when we stopped by to visit Daddy on the farm in South Alabama. To my chagrin, we landed right in the middle of a family reunion of my mother's relatives. I'd forgotten that they gathered annually for a fish fry after spending the day catching fish in Daddy's ponds. When we pulled into the yard full of pickups with bumper stickers that read, "Go Seminoles" and "Get 'em Gators," I knew we were in for it. Nothing to be done but plunge in. I'd already caused a family scandal by divorcing a holy man. Surely it couldn't get much worse. Taking Pat's hand, I took him around and introduced him as my fiancé. One of my elderly aunts reared back and looked down her nose to say, "Oh, I know who he is." Grabbing my arm, she pulled me aside to hiss, "I'm glad your poor mother's dead and gone, or she'd be turning over in her grave." Before I could figure that one out, my sister Becky grabbed my other arm and whispered, "I haven't had a chance to warn you. Daddy told them you moved to South Carolina with a man." "Oh, Lord," I whispered back, "so that's why I'm upset. They're upset. I'm living in sin." Even worse, Becky told me. One of them looked Pat up and found out he's Catholic. Definitely worse. Before I could decide the fastest way to exit, an uncle approached me waving my book. "Where'd you learn all them dirty words, girl? It sure wasn't from your singing mama." Pray God they never read one of Pat's books, I thought, hurrying toward the house and pulling Pat along with me. I was hoping Uncle Charles was there, the real character of the family, because I knew Pat would get a kick out of him. My daddy loved to tell about the time Uncle Charles left the family reunion to run down to Dothan, 10 miles away, to get more oysters for the picnic. No one knew where on earth he went because he never reappeared. Uncle Charles was a favorite with the kids because he carried around a minor bird who could sing all the verses of "I Left My Heart in San Francisco." I adored Uncle Charles. He played a mean harmonica, yodeled as well as Hank Sr., and buck danced like nobody's business. I'm pretty sure I've never seen him sober.
So that gives you that's a little appetizer for the rest of the piece. So, might sound familiar to some of y'all. Family reunions out there. Hopefully they're that excited. Do we have questions out there? Some Q&A. Yes.
I was wondering if any of your children or grandchildren aspire to be writers.
Any of the children or grandchildren aspire to be writers. Yeah, we have Pat's daughter, Melissa, has written some children's books. She's an artist, and so she was doing them mainly for illustration, and then she was going to do one with her dad. He was going to write the text, and she was going to illustrate it, but he got sick, and that didn't happen. My youngest son, writes some poetry and stuff like that. So, yeah, we have some in the family that will carry the torch, I think.
Did you know when you said yes to your future husband that you were going to marry into an unusual family of his? I haven't read your book yet.
Okay.
But it sounds like your family and his family were very interesting.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
How was it with you marrying into his family? I mean, we've heard interviews, and NPR was a wonderful interview with his siblings talking about
Yes.
things that happened because of the books that he read, that he wrote. Obviously, you were included in that. But how was that? You were married for 19 years or so, right?
Yeah, 18. We were together for 19 years, for 18. Yes. Yeah, by then I think I had pretty much an idea. I think both of us did of what we were getting into. Yeah, that also would have known you anyway from Pat's writing. I did get to meet his dad, and I write about that in the book. I knew him for a few months before he died, and he was really quite a character. He was intimidating. He was, there's no question, but also could be very charming. I told Pat, he didn't like this one bit. I told him one time, I said, I think you got your sense of humor from your dad. He said, no, Dad doesn't have a sense of humor. And, but I saw it several times. Pat himself told the story of one time when he was speaking, and his dad would kind of sneak into some of his talks and stuff like that, and he spotted his dad over in the corner, and he said, oh, I see my dad's here. Well, like I say, you don't want to go, because he would do this to me as well. He would say, Dad, why don't you stand up and let these people meet, you know, the great Santini? There he is. Old great Santini, his IQ is about the same as the temperature in this room. And Pat's dad stood up and said, my God, it's hot in here.
Tim brought a copy of a letter that Donald Conroy wrote to the siblings, the Magnificent Seven, you know, giving his review of the Great Santini, and it's pretty funny in that kind of dark humor way. So I think that is probably I think you were right. Your theory is proven correct again.
Somebody over here had to.
I am so grateful that you wrote this book and that you've been so generous. I saw you at Lanier Library and Tryon, and thank you again for the support that you offer in the community for things to do with literary matters. But what fascinated me about your book is it's such a beautiful adult love story between an intelligent, funny, competent woman who is the equal to the man that she's interested in both in the participation and the evolution of the love story of that. And I was wondering, have you had much reaction, as the books come out and you've gone around to just connecting with you in that,
yes,
that experience?
Mm-hmm. Well, because this is a love story as well, and adults in a later life, I was, one thing I knew I'd have to reveal about writing this book, I was a year older than Pat. and so I married an older woman. So I'd already had my 50th birthday when we met, and he was having his that year. So it's a love story, of two people after 50, when, in a different phase of our lives. And I've really had from a lot of younger women, saying, I got divorced and you've given me hope that there might be a life after this. One more, right?
Catherine Seltzer was here the last time Pat came.
Okay.
And I got to talk to both of them. And I'm sorry to hear it's gonna be another couple of years before the book comes out. I had heard it was gonna be last November.
I know.
Is it really not gonna be for another couple of
Now,
years?
what I understand is that she has not turned it in yet.
Okay.
I can,
Have you
I can
talked to
check
her
with her, it's
recently?
been
I
a
haven't
little
talked to her
bit,
in a
but
while.
I know books take a long time. And it's a huge project, so I know
It's probably gonna beat
she's
that.
steadily working, and she's got a couple of kids too, and, so I don't know. We can check in and see, but I know it's a Herculean
And
task.
it's usually, not always, they can speed them up, but it's
Yeah.
usually, you can count on about a year from the time you turn your book in
Yes.
until
Oh,
it
she
comes
hasn't
out.
even turned
Because you
it
go
in.
through
She
all
hasn't.
the, you go through all the editing and
Right.
and so forth. So that's, that's just kind of standard, as you can expect if you hand in your book in the fall, that it'd be coming out the next fall.
Well, I read the one by the other Catherine, and I hope
It will
hope
be.
it is a counterbalance.
It will be.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so it's not,
It'll be good.
not through the roof.
Yes.
This isn't really a question, just a comment. But years ago, when Same Sweet Girls came out, I heard you on Walter Edgar on NPR.
Mhm.
And I was driving between the schools that I worked in. I was laughing so hard, I almost just had to pull off and just park somewhere and listen, because you were so much fun. And I'm just really happy to see you were just as much fun in person.
Thank you, that's sweet. The Same Sweet Girls is my third book, and this is a group of women that we started calling ourselves the Same Sweet Girls. We went to college together because of an incident that happened when we were in school. We all got in trouble with the dean of women. It was a girls' school, and so it was based on composite stories from our lives and from others, Bart's. I did like Pat Bart's and some other stories from that. But it also, there again, you had the darker part of the theme of what would we sacrifice for our friend? What would we be willing to sacrifice for friendship?
You use humor, you have humor, but there's always kind of a...
Pathos
yes.
underneath it. Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
And this is the library's copy, which it's been used, it's been read quite a bit, so we now have to recycle it and order a new one, because it's been well loved. All right, how about one more question?
I just actually had a comment too. In one of your magazine articles, you wrote about the first Christmas that you spent with Pat and how you thought, okay, let's take a nice walk on the beach. And you went in to ask him and he said, but honey, there's a game on. And so I went in and my family was watching the game and I said, look at this. He said, the man's brilliant.
That's correct. Yeah, I've used that in the book as well. As a matter of fact, I think it was already in the book when I did the article, so I sort of edited to fit them. But yeah, that was our first real Christmas together, and that's one time Pat wasn't very romantic. I didn't want to walk on the beach.
It is outside confirmation that Pat Conroy was in fact a genius.
That's
Your other theory is confirmed.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much.